I never thought I'd be that woman. You know, the one who finds out her husband has been living a double life. But there I was, standing in our kitchen on what should have been just another Tuesday morning, holding evidence that would shatter everything I believed about my marriage. It started 3 weeks before our son's 8th birthday. I was looking for our joint credit card to order his birthday presents online when I noticed something odd in my husband David's wallet. A receipt from a jewelry store. My heart did that thing where it skips and races at the same time because our anniversary had passed months ago, and my birthday wasn't until December. For a split second, I let myself believe he was planning some romantic surprise. How naive I was, I told myself not to look. I really did. But that receipt was like a splinter in my mind, and over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. David had been working late more often, always with perfectly reasonable explanations. His phone was suddenly password protected, something about work security, he said. And there were these moments, these tiny little moments where he'd seem distant, like his mind was somewhere else entirely, even when we were together. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I accessed our bank statements online. We'd always been transparent about money. We had a joint account for household expenses and individual accounts for personal spending. It was our system, built on trust. But when I logged into his personal account, using a password I technically shouldn't have known but did, because he'd asked me to check something months ago, what I found made my hands shake so badly I almost dropped my laptop. Monthly transfers. Consistent, substantial monthly transfers to an account I didn't recognize. $2,000 every single month for the past 14 months. That's $28,000. Money that could have gone toward our son's college fund, toward the kitchen renovation we'd been putting off, toward our future. Instead, it was going somewhere else. To someone else. I sat there in our home office, surrounded by family photos on the walls, our son's artwork pinned to the bulletin board, and I felt like I was drowning in my own living room. But I didn't confront him, not yet, because I needed to know everything. I needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before I could decide what to do about it. The next few days were torture. I smiled and made dinner and helped with homework and kissed my husband goodnight, all while this knowledge burned inside me like acid. I started paying attention to everything, every text that made him smile. Every unexplained absence, every little lie I'd previously overlooked because I trusted him. Then came the Thursday that changed everything. David said he had a late meeting, would grab dinner out, don't wait up. Standard excuse. But this time I followed him. I actually got in my car and followed my own husband like some character in a bad movie. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the radio as I stayed 3 cars back, watching his BMW navigate through downtown. He didn't go to his office. He went to an apartment complex on the east side, one of those newer luxury buildings with a doorman and everything. I watched him park, watched him walk in like he owned the place, confident and casual. He was there for 2 hours. 2 hours while I sat in my car, alternating between crying and feeling absolutely numb. When he came out, he was with her. And God, she was young. Maybe 25, with long dark hair and wearing workout clothes like they'd just been at the gym together, though I knew better. They stood by his car talking, and then he kissed her. Not a peck. A real kiss. The kind of kiss that told me this wasn't just about money. This was a relationship. I drove home in a daze and somehow made it into bed before he got there. When he slipped in beside me an hour later, smelling like cologne I didn't recognize, and whispered that he loved me, I had to bite my tongue until it bled to keep from screaming. But I still didn't confront him. Because that night, lying there in the dark, I realized something. I needed evidence. Legal, documented evidence. Because $2,000 a month for over a year wasn't just an affair. That level of financial commitment meant something more. Was he planning to leave me? Was he setting her up in that apartment? Were there legal implications I needed to protect myself and my son from? The next morning, I called my best friend Rachel, who's a paralegal. I told her everything, and she immediately set me up with a divorce attorney named Margaret Chen. I wasn't sure I wanted a divorce, but Margaret said the consultation was just to understand my options and protect myself. She told me to document everything, take screenshots, gather evidence, but not to let David know I was onto him yet. So that's what I did. I became a detective in my own marriage. I found text messages he'd deleted, but that were still backed up to the cloud. Messages that made me physically ill. He called her baby and my angel. He told her he was working on their future together. He promised her things, trips and dreams and a life that sounded nothing like the one we'd built together over 12 years of marriage. I found emails too. Emails to a financial advisor about setting up a separate investment account. Emails about lease agreements. He was building an entire secret life, funded by money from our marriage and planning God knows what. But here's where it gets interesting. As I dug deeper, I discovered something David didn't know I'd found. His mistress, this 25-year-old he was bankrolling, was also playing him. She had a boyfriend. A real boyfriend she lived with in a completely different apartment. I found her social media, which was public, and there he was in dozens of photos. Beach vacations, couple selfies, anniversary posts from just 2 months ago. David wasn't setting up his mistress in that luxury apartment. He was paying for their love nest. He was literally financing another man's relationship with his girlfriend, and he had no idea. The apartment, the money, all of it was going to support both of them while they laughed all the way to the bank. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt empty. My husband was a fool and a cheater, being played by someone even more manipulative than he was. It was almost poetic, except it was my life, my marriage, my family's money being stolen. Our son's birthday was coming up in 5 days. We'd planned this big party, invited 20 kids, rented a bounce house, the whole thing. And I realized David had no intention of stopping his double life, not even for his own child's birthday. He'd probably sneak away during the party to text her, to send her more money, to continue living his lie. That's when I decided I was done being the victim in this story. I called Margaret and told her I wanted to move forward with everything. She'd already drafted papers based on the evidence I'd gathered. She'd documented the financial infidelity, the affair, all of it. But I wanted to add one more thing to my plan. The morning of our son's birthday party, I woke up early. David was still asleep, probably dreaming about his perfect double life. I went downstairs and made coffee. Then I made a phone call. To her, to the mistress. I'd gotten her number from David's hidden messages. She answered, confused about who was calling so early on a Saturday. I introduced myself as David's wife, and there was this long, satisfying silence. Then I told her I knew everything. The apartment, the money, all of it. And then I told her about her boyfriend, whose Instagram I'd been studying all week. I described their trip to Cancun last month in detail. I mentioned his job at the tech startup downtown. I watched her entire con implode through the phone. She tried to deny it at first, but I had screenshots, photos, everything. Then she got angry, accused me of stalking her. I almost laughed. She'd been taking money from my family for over a year, and she was calling me the problem. But then something unexpected happened. She broke down. She started crying and told me she never wanted any of this. Turns out her boyfriend was the mastermind. He'd pushed her into targeting David, into seducing him and stringing him along for money. She said she tried to end it multiple times, but her boyfriend threatened her, said he'd release intimate photos if she didn't keep it going. She was trapped in her own way, manipulated by someone she loved, just like I had been. I didn't forgive her. I want to be clear about that. She made choices that hurt my family. But I understood that this situation was more complicated than just my husband's affair. There were layers of manipulation and abuse here that went beyond what I'd initially seen. I told her I was filing for divorce and that she needed to get away from her boyfriend, that what he was doing was financial abuse and coercion. Then I hung up. I don't know if she took my advice. That was her journey to figure out. The party started at 2 p.m. Kids arrived with presents and excitement. The bounce house was inflated in the backyard, and David played the perfect father, smiling and taking photos and cutting cake. I watched him and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a strange, calm certainty that this chapter of my life was ending. As we sang Happy Birthday and our son blew out his candles, David leaned over and whispered in my ear. He said, "I'm so lucky to have this family. I love you so much." I was folding laundry on a Tuesday afternoon when I found the drawing. Just a crumpled piece of paper that had fallen out of Mark's jacket pocket. Nothing I should have paid attention to. But something about it made me stop. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon, showing a house. With a red door, 2 stick figures holding hands, and a yellow sun in the corner. At the bottom, in shaky letters, it said, "Our family." I stared at it for a long time. Mark and I don't have children. We'd been trying for years, went through 3 rounds of IVF, and finally accepted it wasn't going to happen for us. We'd made peace with it, or so I thought. So whose drawing was this? That night I couldn't bring myself to ask him about it. Mark came home from work like always, kissed me on the forehead, asked about my day. He seemed normal, maybe a little tired, but nothing unusual. I kept the drawing in my pocket, feeling its edges throughout dinner, wondering if I was crazy for being suspicious. But the more I thought about it, the more questions flooded my mind. Was Mark seeing someone else? Did he have a secret child I didn't know about? The thoughts kept me awake all night, listening to him breathe beside me. This man I thought I knew everything about. The next morning, after Mark left for work, I went to his car. I told myself I was just checking, that there had to be a reasonable explanation. His Jeep was unlocked in the driveway and I climbed into the driver's seat, feeling like an intruder in my own life. I opened the glove compartment first, finding nothing but registration papers and old receipts. Then I checked under the seats, in the door pockets, everywhere. That's when I found the folder. It was wedged between the passenger seat and the center console, a plain manila folder that looked like it had been hidden there intentionally. My hands were shaking as I opened it. Inside were more drawings, maybe 10 or 15 of them, all done by the same child. There were pictures of cars, animals, houses, and in several of them, that same stick figure man. One drawing showed the man and child at what looked like a park. Another showed them eating ice cream. Each one was dated in adult handwriting in the corner. The dates went back 6 months. 6 months of Tuesdays, I realized, looking at the pattern. Every Tuesday for half a year, Mark had been somewhere, with someone, doing something he'd never mentioned to me. I sat in that car for over an hour, trying to process what I was seeing. Mark worked as a software engineer. His schedule was predictable. He came home at the same time every day, except Tuesdays. I suddenly remembered how he'd started staying late on Tuesdays about 6 months ago, saying he had a project meeting that ran long. I'd never questioned it because Mark had never given me a reason not to trust him. We'd been married for 9 years, together for 12. We were best friends. Or at least I thought we were. I took the folder inside and sat at the kitchen table, spreading the drawings out in front of me. I studied each one looking for clues. The child's handwriting was improving over time, I could see that. The early drawings were messier, the letters barely legible. The more recent ones showed more skill, more confidence. This was a child Mark had been spending regular time with, watching them grow and develop. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my mind spinning with betrayal and confusion. When I finally composed myself, I knew I had 2 choices. I could confront Mark directly, demand the truth, probably end our marriage in a screaming match. Or I could follow him. I chose to follow him. Maybe that makes me a terrible person, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I blew up our entire life together. So that Tuesday, I called in sick to work and waited. When Mark left the house that evening, telling me he'd be late because of his Tuesday meeting, I got in my car and followed him. He didn't go to his office. Instead, he drove across town to a neighborhood I'd never been to. Modest houses with chain-link fences and toys scattered in yards. He pulled up in front of a small blue house and sat in his car for a moment, like he was gathering courage. Then he got out, walked up to the door, and knocked. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The door opened and I saw a woman, maybe in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail. She smiled when she saw Mark, a warm smile, and gestured him inside. That's when I saw the child, a little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, come running to the door and throw his arms around Mark's waist. I watched through my windshield, parked half a block away, as Mark bent down and hugged this child. The way he held him, the way the boy looked up at him, there was so much affection there, so much familiarity. This wasn't a chance encounter. This was a relationship. I felt like I was watching my husband live a secret life, a life that included the family we could never have together. The betrayal was suffocating. I wanted to storm up to that house, demand answers, make a scene. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the gentle way Mark ruffled the boy's hair, or the peaceful expression on his face, something I hadn't seen in years. So I waited. An hour passed, then 2. Finally, Mark emerged from the house, the little boy waving from the doorway. Mark waved back, got in his car, and drove away. I didn't follow him home. Instead, I waited a few minutes. Then I walked up to that blue house and knocked on the door myself. The same woman answered, her smile fading when she saw a stranger on her porch. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. I took a deep breath and said the words that felt impossible to speak. "I'm Mark's wife, and I need to know who that little boy is." The woman's face went pale. She glanced back into the house, then stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. "You should come back when we can talk properly," she said quietly. "This isn't a conversation for right now." But I couldn't leave. I'd come this far, I'd seen too much. "Please," I said, and my voice cracked. "Please just tell me what's going on. Is that Mark's son?" The woman looked at me with something like pity, and that look almost broke me completely. "No," she said softly. "That's not Mark's son. That's Mark's brother." Brother? The word didn't make sense. Mark was an only child. He'd told me that when we first started dating, told me about his lonely childhood, his parents who'd passed away before we met. There was no brother. "That's impossible," I said. "Mark doesn't have a brother." The woman, whose name I later learned was Patricia, sighed deeply. "Maybe you should come inside," she said. But quietly. "Danny doesn't know about any of this, and I don't want him confused or upset." I followed her into the house, my legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. Inside, the house was modest but clean, filled with the kind of warmth that comes from being well-loved. I could hear a TV playing in another room, cartoons by the sound of it. Patricia led me to the kitchen and gestured for me to sit. "Mark never told you about Danny?" she asked, and when I shook my head, she looked troubled. "That boy is Mark's half-brother. Same father, different mothers. Danny's mom, Lisa, was your husband's father's second wife after Mark's mother passed away. Lisa and Danny's dad were only married for 2 years before he died too. Danny was just a baby then." I tried to process this information, tried to match it with everything Mark had told me about his life. "Why wouldn't Mark tell me he had a brother?" I asked. Patricia poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. "Because Mark didn't know about Danny until 6 months ago," she said. "I'm Lisa's mother, Danny's grandmother. Lisa died last year, cancer. And in her final days, she told me about Mark. She'd lost touch with him after his father died. He was already grown and out of the house by then, and she was so young and overwhelmed with a baby. She always felt guilty about it, about not trying harder to keep that connection. Before she passed, she made me promise to find Mark, to let him know he had a brother. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still felt lost in the story." "So you found him 6 months ago?" I asked. Patricia nodded. It took me a while to work up the courage, honestly. I didn't know how he'd react, if he'd even believe me. But I had documents, photos, proof of the marriage, and Danny's birth certificate. When I finally called Mark, he was shocked. He agreed to meet me, and I brought Danny. The moment those two saw each other, even though they'd never met, there was this connection. Danny's been through so much, losing his mom and Mark. Well, I think meeting Danny filled something in him too. Why didn't he tell me? The question came out as almost a whisper. That's what hurt the most, not the secret brother, but the fact that Mark had hidden it from me for 6 months. Patricia looked uncomfortable. "He wanted to," she said. "He talked about you every time he visited. But he said things were complicated at home. that you two had been trying to have children and it hadn't worked out. He was afraid of how you'd react, finding out he had this young brother who needed him. He didn't want to hurt you. I sat there in that kitchen, crying into my coffee, while this stranger who was somehow connected to my husband explained the secret life he'd been living. Mark had been spending every Tuesday evening with Danny, helping him with homework, playing games, being the big brother this little boy desperately needed. Patricia couldn't take care of Danny full-time anymore. Her health was failing, and she'd been hoping Mark might eventually agree to take Danny in, to become his legal guardian. "He's been wrestling with how to ask you," Patricia said gently. "He loves you so much, he talks about you constantly. But he also loves Danny, and he feels responsible for him. It's been tearing him apart." I left that house in a daze, driving home on autopilot. When I got there, Mark's car was already in the driveway. I found him in the living room, pacing, his phone in his hand. When he saw me, relief flooded his face, followed immediately by concern. "Where were you? I've been calling you, I was getting worried." I pulled the folder of drawings from my bag and set it on the coffee table between us. I watched the color drain from his face as he recognized what it was. "I found these in your car," I said. "And then I followed you tonight. And then I met Patricia and Danny." Mark sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice muffled. "I'm so sorry. I wanted to tell you. I tried so many times, but I didn't know how." We talked for hours that night. Mark told me everything. From the moment Patricia first contacted him to his weekly visits with Danny, to the crushing guilt he felt every time he lied to me about where he was going. He told me about Danny's nightmares about losing his mother, about how the boy had started calling him Big, Brother Mark, about how Patricia's emphysema was getting worse and she might not be able to care for Danny much longer. "I know what you're going to ask me," I said when he finally stopped talking. "You want to bring Danny here to live with us?" Mark looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I don't want to force this on you," he said. "I know it's not what we planned. I know after everything we went through trying to have our own children, this must feel like some kind of cosmic joke. But he's my brother, and he's just a little boy who's lost everyone. I can't abandon him." I thought about the drawings, about that child's improving handwriting, about Mark's face when Danny hugged him at the door. "Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me?" I asked. "Because I was a coward," Mark said simply. "Because I was afraid you'd see it as me choosing him over you, over us. Because I didn't want to add more pain to everything we'd already been through. But mainly because I was a coward, and I'm sorry." We sat in silence for a long time. I thought about our marriage, about the future I'd imagined for us, just the two of us, maybe traveling, maybe getting a dog, definitely not raising a child. But I also thought about that little boy who'd already lost so much, and about the man I married. The man who'd been secretly trying to be there for his brother while trying to protect my feelings in the most misguided way possible. "I need to meet him properly," I finally said. "Not as the woman spying from a car, but as your wife. If we're going to do this, if Danny's going to be part of our lives, I need to know him." The relief on Mark's face was visible. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for even considering this." I held up my hand. "I'm not promising anything yet." "This is huge, Mark. This changes everything about our lives. But I'm willing to meet him, to see if this could work. That's all I can offer right now." The following week, Mark arranged for us to have dinner at Patricia's house. I was nervous, my hands sweating as we walked up to that blue door. Danny opened it, and seeing him up close for the first time, I could see the resemblance to Mark. Same dark eyes, same slightly crooked smile. "You must be Mark's wife," Danny said shyly. "He talks about you a lot. He says you're really smart and funny." My heart cracked a little at that. This child, who had every reason to resent me, who probably knew on some level that I was the obstacle to him having a stable home, was trying to make me feel welcome. Dinner was awkward at first, everyone trying too hard to be normal. But then Danny started telling me about his school project on space, and his eyes lit up exactly the way Mark's did when he talked about things he was passionate about. I found myself drawn into conversation with him, asking questions, listening to his enthusiastic explanations about planets and galaxies. At one point, he showed me his drawings, including ones he'd made for Mark. "I'm not very good yet," he said, "but Mark says I'm improving." I looked at the drawing of the house with the red door, the one that had started all of this. "I think you're very talented," I told him honestly. After Danny went to bed, Patricia, Mark, and I talked about the practicalities. Patricia's health was declining faster than expected. The doctors were saying she might need to move to an assisted living facility within the next few months. Danny needed stability, needed a permanent home, needed family. "I can keep him until the end of the school year," Patricia said. "That gives you a few months to decide, to prepare if you choose to take him in. But I need to know he'll be taken care of. He's all I have left of my daughter." On the drive home, Mark and I were both quiet. Finally, I said, "He's a good kid." Mark nodded. "He is. He's been through hell, but he's resilient. Smart, kind, a little shy, but he opens up when he's comfortable." I watched the streetlights pass by through the window. "Our lives will completely change," I said. "No more spontaneous weekends away. No more quiet evenings. No more freedom to do whatever we want. We'll be parents, Mark. We'll be responsible for another human being." Mark reached over and took my hand. "I know. And if you can't do it, if it's too much, I'll understand. I'll figure something out with Patricia. Maybe help pay for additional care, visit Danny regularly. I won't let this destroy us." But even as he said it, I knew that's exactly what it would do. If I made Mark choose between me and Danny, even if he chose me, our marriage would never recover. He'd resent me, or worse, he'd resent himself. And the truth was, sitting there in the car, thinking about that little boy with Mark's smile and his mother's drawings, I wasn't sure I wanted him to choose me over Danny. Maybe we couldn't have the children we tried so hard to create, but here was a child who needed us, who was already part of Mark's family, who could be part of mine too if I was brave enough to let him in. "I want to spend more time with him," I said finally. "Before we make any big decisions, I need to get to know him better. Can we do that? Can we visit together? Maybe have him over here on weekends?" Mark's whole body relaxed. "Yes," he said. "Yes, of course. Whatever you need." Over the next few months, Danny became a regular part of our lives. At first, it was scheduled visits, careful and somewhat formal. But gradually, it became more natural. Danny would come over on Saturday mornings and Mark would make pancakes while Danny told us about his week. I helped him with his English homework and discovered he loved reading as much as I did. We took him to the science museum, to the movies, to the park where I watched Mark push him on the swings and felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't love at first sight. I'd be lying if I said I immediately embraced the role of parent. There were moments of resentment, times when I mourned the life Mark and I weren't going to have. Quiet moments when I felt jealous of the easy affection between Danny and Mark. But there were also moments of unexpected joy. Like when Danny made me a drawing of the three of us together and labeled it "My Family," or when he asked if he could call me by my first name because Mrs. felt too formal, but he wasn't ready to say Mom yet. And the fact that he'd even thought about it made me want to cry. Patricia's health deteriorated faster than anyone expected. In March, she had to be hospitalized, and it became clear she couldn't go home again. Danny moved into our house on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, carrying everything he owned in 3 suitcases and a backpack. He stood in our guest room, which we'd hastily converted into a bedroom for him, and tried so hard to be brave. "Thank you for letting me stay here," he said quietly, and the formality of it broke my heart. "This is your home now," I told him. "Not just a place you're staying, your home." The first few weeks were hard. Danny had nightmares and would wake up crying for his mother. Mark and I took turns sitting with him until he fell back asleep. He was anxious about everything, asking permission for the smallest things, terrified of being a burden. Slowly, with patience and consistency, he started to relax. He started to believe that we weren't going anywhere, that this was real and permanent. One night, about a month after he'd moved in, he called me from his room. When I got there, he was sitting up in bed, clutching his blanket. "Can I tell you something?" he asked. I sat down next to him. Of course. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm glad Mark found me. And I'm glad you said yes to me living here. I know it probably wasn't easy. Out of the mouths of children, right? This 8-year-old boy somehow understood the complexity of the situation better than I'd given him credit for. It wasn't easy, I admitted, but it was the right thing. And I'm glad you're here too. He smiled at me. That crooked Mark smile and said, Good night, Mom. He said it so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world, then lay down and closed his eyes. I sat there for a long time after he fell asleep, processing that single word. Mom. I'd never thought I'd hear it. Patricia passed away in May, peacefully in her sleep. Danny was devastated, but he weathered it better than I'd feared, maybe because he'd already lost his mother and had learned how to grieve. At the funeral, he stood between Mark and me, holding both our hands, and I realized that this was our family now. We'd become a family not through biology or careful planning, but through circumstance and choice and love that grew in unexpected places. It wasn't the family I'd imagined, but looking at Danny, seeing him starting to heal and thrive, I understood it was the family I was meant to have. That was 2 years ago. Danny's 10 now, thriving in school,